pro side and 3 speeches from the con side. The first 2 speeches from each side will be 8 minutes in length. After each 8-minute speech, there will be a 1-minute cross-examination from the opposing side, and the speaker will have 1 minute to reply. After these speeches, we will have a period of questions from the House and from the teams. We will then hear a 6-minute concluding speech from each side. Finally, we will decide which team was more persuasive by voting with our feet. If, after carefully considering the arguments of the pro side, you find the quality of their presentation superior, you will depart through the doors on that side. If, after carefully considering the arguments of the con side, you find the quality of their presentation superior, you will depart through the doors on that side. Our purpose is to judge the quality of the argumentation we hear this evening. At this time, I call upon the captain of the pro side, Sam Pearson, to introduce the members of his team.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for taking time out of your evening to be with us today to discuss this, listen to us discuss this important argument. I want to thank our TA Lindy, Professor Rude, and Professor Walling for making this all possible and giving us a great experience. I would like to remind everyone that we are on the pro side and we are going to be arguing that it is immoral to patent life-saving medications. Our first speaker is Adele Belitsqueta, is our PA major. Our second speaker, Hannah Rojas, is also a PA major. Our third speaker, John Kalacki, is an accounting major. And then our first cross examiner is Julia Kubundi, and she is an environmental science major. Our second cross examiner is Lachlan Hoskins, and she is a nursing major. And then finally, our third cross examiner is Noah Meister, and he is a bio major. Thank you for your guys' time, and I hope you guys enjoy this debate.
And I now call upon the captain of the con side, Haley Tomlinson, to introduce her team.
Hello everyone. Like Sam said, thank you for coming and joining us tonight, taking the time out of your night. My name is Haley Tomlinson, as mentioned before. I'm a chemistry major here, and I'm also the team captain of the con side of this debate. I'll introduce you to each of my team members, starting with their name, their major, and then a fun fact about them. First, we have Nicholas Flores. He's a mechanical engineer major, and he plays the drums. Next, we have Maddie Petruski. She's a biomedical engineering major, and she wants to attend medical school and become an engineer, a neurosurgeon after Malcolm. Then we have Jeremy Willis. He's a psychology major, and he works at a casino. We have Gabby Malrick. She's a meteorology major, and she has 4 dogs and a cat. We have Mason Zabini. He's a mechanical engineering major, and he won a coloring contest in elementary school. We have Isabel Mitchell. She's a social work major, and she has 3 adorable dogs. We hope you enjoy. Thank you so much.
I now ask the audience to hold any further applause until after the debate. At this time, I call upon the pro side to present its first speaker, Adele Belitsqueta.
Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight. The issue before us today is whether it is morally acceptable to patent life-saving medicines. We, the affirmative team, will argue that the patenting of life-saving medicines is immoral because it allows drug companies to exploit people by capitalizing on their life or death situations, resulting in unnecessary fatalities and disproportionately harms vulnerable groups. We will do this by showing that pharmaceutical companies abuse the monopoly protection patents provide to increase drug prices far above the normal rate, exploiting the desperate situation of their customers to unjustly maximize profits at the expense of human lives. Patenting life-saving medicines at the root enabler of this broken system are therefore immoral. I think it would be helpful to start by defining our terms. A patent is a government-granted license for the patent holder to have exclusive rights to manufacture, market, and sell a specific product, usually for a term of 20 years. A life-saving medicine is a long-term or emergency medication such as insulin and epinephrine that is necessary to prevent the death of a patient. In theory, patents are meant to protect private property and provide a way for inventors to benefit from their creations. While the patenting of life-saving medicines offers some of these advantages, it also leads to a bevy of harmful outcomes, chief among which is the enablement of exploitative practices. The criteria for exploitation are simple. First, there must be a disadvantaged group whose situation dictates a lack of options and free choice. Second, there must be an exploiter, someone who unfairly leverages the disadvantaged group's circumstances against them for a personal benefit. To illustrate this effectively, let us examine the classic case of the last well in a desert. Imagine a scenario where there is only one well remaining in a vast desert. Everyone around needs the water from the well to survive. However, the owner of the well, aware of his advantageous position, decides to inflate the price of water greatly. Despite his legal right to be compensated for his product, the well owner's actions are clearly immoral because he exploits the desperate situation of his customers in order to unjustly maximize his profits. Though the owner has no obligation to give the water away, he does have a duty not to abuse his unique water monopoly to defraud his customers, especially because they have no other choice but to buy his water or die. I urge you to keep this example of exploitation in mind as I proceed with my argument. In the case of patenting life-saving medicines, both criteria for exploitation are met. First, the vulnerable group is the people who need patented medicines to survive. Their free choice is necessarily limited because their only option is to attain the medicine they need or die. Patents also ensure a lack of choices by preventing the existence of alternative medications. The second criteria for exploitation is fulfilled as well, namely in the case of patenting life-saving medicine, there exists an entity, the patent holder, usually a pharmaceutical company, that unfairly leverages the circumstances of the disadvantaged group for personal gain. By unfairly, we mean that the exploiter charges far above what the price would be in a market with normal competition. While there is absolutely nothing wrong with the company being fairly compensated for their product, exploiting someone by price gouging an essential item is inherently immoral. The primary way pharmaceutical companies use patents to exploit people is through excessive drug pricing. Over the past several decades in the U.S., prescription drug prices have risen rapidly. For instance, a study from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services found that between 2011 and 2021, drug prices increased 64% adjusted for inflation. This is a staggering increase in only 10 years. It is also projected that drug prices will continue to rise, doubling between 2020 and 2030. These recent price spikes have been largely attributed to the strengthening of pharmaceutical patent regime. Patent holders use their monopoly privileges to take full advantage of their captive market, who, in the case of life-saving medicines, requires these drugs to survive by charging prices far above the normal market rate. The extent of this price gouging can be easily seen when comparing the prices of drugs before and after patent expiration when generic competitors enter the market. For instance, an article from the National Library of Medicine notes that a bevy of studies during the mid-2000s showed that mitigating effects patent expiry and generic competition have on drug prices. These studies estimated that on average, after the expiration of the patent and the introduction of generic competitors, the price of the original drug dropped more than 50%. Others noted that the first generic competitor would bring prices down 66% in the first year and an additional 34% by year 4. All of this evidence points to only one conclusion. Pharmaceutical drug patents allow drug companies to price gouge their customers by charging more than 100% more than what the cost would be in a normal, non-monopolized market, clearly comprising exploitation. This is the most dangerous for life-saving medicines, as the people who need them have no alternative but to pay the exorbitant prices or die. The consequences of these price hikes are real and frightening for thousands of Americans. According to a study conducted by the West Health Policy Center in 2020, it is estimated that, quote, cost-related non-adherence to drug therapy will result in a premature deaths of 100,000 beneficiaries a year, making it a leading cause of death in the U.S., end quote. In other words, more Americans will die every year due to the artificially high prices created by a monopolistic patent regime than because of almost any other cause. Another West Health study predicted that between 2020 and 2030, over 1 million Americans could die prematurely because they are unable to afford the life-saving medicine they desperately need. All this just goes to show the deadly effects that patenting life-saving medicines have. Now that we've examined the evidence and given you the irrefutable facts of the case, namely that patents on life-saving medicines lead to the exploitation of vulnerable groups by allowing drug companies to charge astronomically high prices for necessary medication, which ultimately results in the premature deaths of thousands, I hope you can recognize the system for what it is. Not a protection for innovators, but a means to immorally exploit the helpless and dying for excess profit. To fully round up this argument, I would like to present you with a historical analogy that bears a striking resemblance to the issue before us today, that of human slavery. I think we can all agree that making a profit by exploiting people is wrong. Slavery is a perfect example. No one would attempt to argue that slavery is morally right because it forces people into a situation where they lack all freedom of choice and are subject to the whims of profiteering masters. This is exactly what the patenting of life-saving medicines leads to, exploiting people to make a profit with no regard for the well-being. In the same way that people should be allowed to work for fair wages and choose their occupation, people who need specific medications to live should be able to buy them at a fair price and have the freedom to buy from a different supplier if they choose. In the end, this is an argument about morality. Just as the owner of the last well in the desert has no right to exploit his neighbors, drug companies do not have the right to exploit people by giving them an ultimatum between paying exorbitant prices or death. Unfortunately, this is the exact scenario caused by the current patent system. Patents grant monopoly privileges that are abused to the point causing tens of thousands of Americans to die prematurely every year. Though companies have a right to be compensated for their products, they should do so in a free market where competition is allowed, not in an artificial monopoly that gives them the ability to hold dying people hostage for profit. Because of these reasons, we urge you to recognize the blatant immorality of patenting life-saving medicines. Thank you.
Does the con side wish to cross-examine?
Yes.
In your speech, you mentioned the last well in the desert as an analogy, and we would like to counter that by asking, is it the thing itself that is bad, the patent, or is it the people behind it who are raising the prices? So, for example, we have an analogy of a car accident. If somebody were to get injured in a car accident, is it the car that is the problem, or is it the person who's driving? So, essentially our question is the patent itself evil, or is it the people behind it? Thank you.
Would the pro side like to respond?
Yes.
The reason that patents are immoral as opposed to the case that you mentioned, such as a car accident, is because they are enabling the immoral activity. The argument that the people are actually making the immoral action is sort of invalidated by the fact that the patent is the thing that allows them to do such, and thus is the instigator and the actual immoral agent in this scenario.
At this time, I call upon the con side to present its first speaker, Nick Flores.
Good evening. My name is Nicholas Flores, and I will be the first speaker on the con side of this argument. We argue that it is not immoral to patent life-saving medicines in the United States. Defined by the United States Patent and Trademark Office, or USPTO for short, a U.S. patent gives you, the inventor, the right to exclude others from making, using, offering for sale, or selling an invention or importing it into the U.S. A possible misconception of this debate lies in who exactly is placing these patents on life-saving medicines. We are not arguing in favor of large pharmaceutical companies who often are referred to as big pharma, who obtain the patent after it is placed, but rather we argue in favor of the researchers and the scientists who dedicate their own time, money, and often entire lives in order to create medicine with the capacity to save lives. Without patents, these individuals would lack both recognition and protection for their work. Imagine a scientist who spends decades researching cures for cancer, HIV, or Alzheimer's, investing not only time, but also financial resources, only to have their discoveries immediately replicated by others who contributed nothing to the discovery. In such a system, the incentive to innovate would collapse. Economist Kenneth Arrow argues that information, including how to make a medicine, is costly to produce, but cheap to reproduce, making a form of protection over these medicines necessary. Patents serve as that protection, ensuring that those who take on the risk of research and development have a fair opportunity to benefit from their work. First, the patents are morally permissible because they provide the incentive and funding necessary to develop life-saving medicines. The concept of intellectual property plays a foundational role in scientific progress. The USPTO defines intellectual property as creative works or ideas embodied in a form that can be shared or enable others to recreate, emulate, or manufacture them. In this case, intellectual property is the medicine itself, which is the result of years of experimentation, many possibly failed trials, and billions of dollars in funding. According to the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, the average cost of developing a new prescription medicine exceeds $2.6 billion when accounting for failed attempts and regulatory processes. Without the exclusivity provided by patents, companies and independent researchers would have little ability to recover these costs, making such investments economically irrational. Empirical evidence strongly supports the idea that patents drive innovation. A widely cited study by Edwin Mansfield, a leading economist analysis, found that 65% of pharmaceutical innovations would not have developed without patent protection. This highlights a crucial factor, for patents are not merely a reward system, but rather they are necessary for innovation to occur in the first place. Without the possibility of profit, the incentive to undertake high-risk, high-cost research diminishes significantly. Second, patents are not immoral because they balance innovation with long-term accessibility. Though the argument may be made that patenting life-saving medicines restricts access and raises prices, which is a valid concern, it is important to distinguish between the existence of patents and the pricing strategies of pharmaceutical companies. Patents themselves do not inherently dictate high prices, rather they provide a period of exclusivity. Governments and institutions can, and often do, implement policies such as price controls and insurance systems in order to address affordability without dismantling the patent system entirely. Furthermore, patents are not permanent. In the United States, pharmaceutical patents typically last 20 years from the date of filing, after which generic manufacturers can produce the medicine at significantly lower costs. The introduction of generics is shown to reduce the medicine prices as much as 80 to 85% according to the FDA. The system strikes a balance between rewarding innovation and eventually ensuring widespread accessibility. Without the initial patent period, however, many of these medicines would never exist in the first place. Third, and most notably, patents are morally justified because they protect the rights of the individual who creates these medicines. Developing a life-saving medicine is the result of years and often decades of continuous labor and research. In nearly every profession, individuals are compensated for the time and effort that they invest into their work. There is no reasonable expectation that a person should dedicate their life to a profession without receiving some form of payment. Therefore, it would be inconsistent to expect scientists and researchers to commit themselves fully to the development of life-saving medicines without compensation. This concept is supported by research on intellectual property and innovation, which suggests that patents fortify incentives to undertake risky research projects and help distribute rewards more fairly across the research and development process. Therefore, patents are not simply about profit. They allow researchers to justify taking on the immense personal and financial risk associated with developing these new medicines. Without some form of compensation, many individuals will be unable to pursue this work at all, as research and development is a full-time commitment that requires financial stability. In addition to compensation, patents serve a critical moral role by protecting individuals from having their work taken or copied without permission. In general, taking someone else's work without credit is widely considered to be morally wrong. This principle applies not only in everyday situations such as plagiarism in academia, but also scientific and technological research. Patents ensure that those who create something new are able to control how it is used at least for a period of time. Without this protection, others could replicate a discovery immediately and benefit from the work that they did not contribute to, which undermines the basic principles of fairness. This concept is further supported by philosophical reasoning. John Locke argues that individuals have a natural right to the products of their labor, meaning that when a person invests time and effort into creating something, they gain a moral claim to it. In the case of life-saving medicines, researchers dedicate years of their life along with their knowledge and resources to produce a result that benefits society. As a result, they have a legitimate moral right to protect that creation. Denying them that right would allow others to benefit from their labor without contribution, which is fundamentally unjust. As a whole, patents on life-saving medicines are not immoral, but they are instead necessary, justified, and beneficial. They ensure that life-saving medicines are developed in the first place, create a system of incentives that balances innovation with accessibility, and protect the fundamental rights of individuals who dedicate their lives to this work. So I ask you to consider this. On the issue of medicines that determine whether people live or die, is the moral system really the one that removes incentives, removes protection, and discourages innovation? Or is it the one that ensures that these medicines continue to be created? For these reasons, we respectfully ask that you vote con and affirm that it is not immoral to patent life-saving medicines. Thank you.
Does the pro side wish to cross-examine?
Yes.
You argue that patents are essential because they're providing financial incentives for these companies that are investing in R&D. That's ultimately leading to new life-saving medicines. However, given that the system can result in higher drug prices that limit access for those who need it most, how can you justify a model where innovation exists but is not equitably accessible?
The patents that the researchers make is what is being talked about, not the actions that are done with the patent afterwards. Researchers spend several years of their lives. If researchers spend several years of their lives, is it morally permissible for them to make a patent so others won't be able to steal that information? We're discussing about the initial patent period, not what happens after the patent period, as we are looking at those who initially patent, not those who are sold the patent, who are often these pharmaceutical companies.
At this time, I call upon the pro side to present its second speaker, Hannah Rojas.
Thank you. I would like to begin with addressing the argument for innovation. The idea that patents are vitally necessary for innovation is very dangerous to say. The reason for this is that far from incentivizing innovation, patents actually diminish it. First, despite possible reasonable appeal to this claim, There is actually no evidence that patents lead to innovation, with a bevy of economic studies failing to find a positive correlation between the patent protection and its innovation. In fact, patents are actually proven to suppress innovation because they stifle the competition, as it is also not needed for a reward. As a proven economic driver, incentivizing companies to focus on lobbying efforts to maintain their monopoly status instead of inventing new products. Second, patents also incentivize companies to engage in patent exploitation, such as evergreen and rent-seeking. Evergreening can be defined as being used as patent product protection and marketing monopoly beyond its initial terms. While this is something to keep in mind, as though we are discussing the relevant term, during the primary term, often evergreening takes place, which is allowing patents to keep the monopoly that they currently have over the economy. Third, patents are not necessary for profit insurance. It takes years for competitors to reverse engineer a drug to set up logistics of a manufacturer, meaning the originator of the medicine still has a window to recoup. They will be able to make up the cost without the use of patents and the harmful practice that they encourage. Lastly, much of the original research that leads to medical breakthroughs is showing patents is that innovation will not grind to a sudden halt if patents are removed. In summary, the notion that patenting the life-saving medicine is morally acceptable because patents are necessary to drive innovation in the field does not hold in the context of modern communities. This primarily is due to the fact that patents are not necessary as a financial incentive, and far from leading to innovation, they actually discourage it. It is one thing to hear the numbers and the logistics of the immortality of patenting life-saving medicine, and it is a whole other thing to witness them firsthand. Personally, I have seen a child at camp have type 1 diabetes, which when not treated properly is a life-threatening condition. I have seen his mother drive over 6 hours to get him the life-saving medication that he needs to simply go about his daily life. This child was only 5 years old. He will spend the rest of his life with his chronic disease. Due to the inaccessibility that patents create, it becomes very difficult for those with severe medical conditions to obtain the treatment that resulted in the child's mother being unable to clock into work that day because she spent 6 hours driving. Unfortunately, that is not the only story like this, as I have witnessed it within my own family. Patents unfairly and disproportionately affect certain demographics. According to the American Journal of Public Health, the dates of diabetes diagnosis are heavily affected by ethnicity. Then this is compounded with the fact that those with diabetes often fall into a lower socioeconomic class, with diabetics tending to earn less, with a median individual annual coming to $9,550 compared to $20,125 among non-diabetics. When you consider the fact that a person in a lower socioeconomical society is making less money, it is not an unfair correlation to say that they have increased stress levels, and increased stress levels often correlate with higher predisposition along with inherited predisposition to diseases like diabetes, as well as other chronic health conditions that would require life-saving medicine. However, due to the lower amount of income that the people in these classes are unable to readily afford the life-saving medication that is needed and are often forced to make difficult choices over which to prioritize their health or the needs of their family. When this knowledge is overlaid with demographic maps of the United States, it has become clear that the southern regions of the United States have a genetic predisposition for life-threatening diseases such as diabetes, which is significantly higher, as well as the average household income being lower. This pulls together all the statistics I mentioned earlier. This life-saving medication they require the expense is put on by the patent. This is all public knowledge that has been confirmed by accredited sources. It is why we are able to take the stand that patenting life-saving medicine is immoral, as it is infringing upon someone's basic need. A person cannot control the ethnicity with which they are born, and they cannot control their own genetic predisposition. And it is immoral that medicines that needed for daily basic function are patented, and increasing the cost so much that they cannot afford it. The patenting of life-saving medicine goes directly against morals and fundamentals with which Western civilization was founded. When the founding fathers were putting together ideas for the nation, it was cited in the Declaration of Independence that every man is entitled to certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life-saving medicine, the patenting of life-saving medicines, goes directly against those values. As a person cannot live without the medication that their body needs, their life is at the mercy of the patent, and therefore the expense that the patent provides, as the patent has allowed the medication to become so expensive that it is impossible for families to afford. Exploitation is morally wrong. This can be agreed upon in multiple ways, including Kant, who argues that people have an inherent value due to their rational nature. He thinks that people should be treated as ends, not means to the ends. They are not pawns in someone else's game of chess. Exploitation disregards people's inherent value and treats them exclusively as a means to a profit. A person cannot exercise their liberty if they are constrained within the limitations of their own body as a result from the patents, which are making it more difficult and more complicated to obtain the medications they need for basic survival, let alone the pursuit of their dreams, the pursuit of their passions. How are they expected to achieve their dreams and shoot for the stars if they're worried if they'll even make it through work that day? A person is entitled to the necessary things that one needs for survival. Due to the patents that are controlling the life-saving medications, they are unable what they need for daily life. It was mentioned earlier that the car company is not blamed for the person that is in charge of the vehicle. While that is true, the person made the choice to get behind the wheel. However, my little sister cannot choose whether or not she is diabetic. Thank you.
Does the con side wish to cross-examine?
You had previously said that patents actually decrease the innovation for these research of these life-saving medicines, but a study from 2024 actually states that the patents for these life-saving medicines and whatnot actually has like the most innovation, and it's like the biggest research system in the United States. And so how would you respond to that? So far, no evidence that patents lead to innovation has been found with a bevy of economic studies, failing to find a positive correlation between patent protection and innovation. Patents actually suppress innovation because they stifle competition, a proven economic driver, and incentivize companies to focus on lobbying efforts to maintain their monopoly status instead of inventing new products. Do you have stats?
At this time, I call upon the con side to present its second speaker, Maddie Petruzzi.
Good evening. I would like to begin my speech by addressing some of the topics that were brought up by the president. As we already mentioned, we do agree that drug companies abuse the use of patents, and to their credit, they did mention that in this case, patents are said to be enabling this type of behavior. Well, we should also consider if we're going back to the car analogy, that's like saying that the car enables car crashes that could ultimately kill other people, but in the same breath, we need cars and we need transportation because while they have the potential to do bad things, they also have the potential for a lot of good. And so, to that extent, we can't say the car is completely immoral. Furthermore, we should also discuss the well-being of the researchers who are actually completing the research on the medication, because a lot of times it isn't people who work at Big Pharma. These researchers need compensation in order to live their daily lives. For a lot of these people, it is their entire livelihood. Because of the importance of this type of research, it's something that takes your entire being all day. It's a lot of what these researchers do solely. To expect them to go to work without compensation is just unrealistic. And in the terms of morality, we call this something that's supererogatory. It means that it is something that we cannot realistically expect people to do. Because would you go to work for free? Probably not. We would also like to address the fact that patents tend to drop after the patent expires. A lot of this is due to the formation of generics, which, I mean, naturally are a lot cheaper. But research shows that despite this price, many people still choose the patented form just because all the research and development has been, there's a lot more safety and research that has been done on that particular medication compared to the generic version. And to that point, it's able to be a lot cheaper because the research and development was already done by someone else. It was also mentioned that this patents prevent other people from accessing the research while it's like presently going on, which could be seen as like a limitation of access, which could be seen as immoral. However, if we consider an alternative, so say that the patent isn't present and the rest of the world has access to this research as you're doing it, what is stopping someone from taking that research and calling it their own after you did all the work? From a moral perspective, like as someone who would have put in all that work, I don't think anyone can safely sit here and say that that's okay. In response to the previous claims about discrimination, we should also remember that that's not exclusively limited to patents. There is a lot of inequality in results to shelter and food and like basically everything outside of that. So it's not just strictly limited to medicine. And in the same breath, all of those other attributes are also necessary to survival. So, due to the inherent purpose of a patent, they can easily be viewed as weapons for pharmaceutical companies to wield in their effort to make large profits off the sufferings of ordinary people, monopolizing the drug industry and driving prices through the roof. There is no denying the immorality of this situation. However, I plead you again to remember that the evil in this situation is not the patent by the owner. These companies often obtain the patents on these medications after the research and development has already been done by some smaller researcher who initially owned the patent. It is because of these small researchers that the existence of patents is at the very least morally permissible. And when I say small researchers, these could be anybody. It could be people you know, it could be your neighbor, it could be your professors, it could be anyone. Patents are extremely important in enabling the production of life-saving medicines and ensuring the authenticity of these medications. The production of life-saving medicines is by no means cheap. Between time, labor, and resources, production costs can range anywhere between less than $1 billion to over $2 billion, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Imagine being that small nonprofit research group trying to fund the development of a medication all on your own. It would be nearly impossible for a number of reasons, mainly for the fact that motivating factors would be minimal. Patents are legally defined as incentives for innovation. As I already stated, it is supererogatory to expect researchers to expend years of their lives developing life-saving medications without monetary compensation. These people have to feed their families. They have to provide for themselves in addition to providing things that are crucial for the rest of the population. In an ideal world, people would freely dedicate their time to these activities, but it is unrealistic and unreasonable to simply expect that from everyone. With mouths to feed and desire for a good quality of life, humans need monetary compensation from their jobs to survive. To put this into perspective, think about all the money that we pay professional athletes just to entertain us. I would think that it's justifiable to pay people who are dedicating their lives to life-saving endeavors for the rest of the population to also be entitled to a paycheck. Ultimately, if we neglect to incentivize the production of medication, we can realistically expect very few people to do it. At that point, many of these life-saving medications we're discussing would cease to exist in the first place. We should also take a moment to consider the basis on which receiving credit for your own work is morally justified. To put it into like a perspective that we can all understand, think about preparing for a test. You've studied, you've worked really hard, and then while you're taking that test, someone cheats off you. And so they get the result that you got, but hypothetically say they turn you in for cheating and all of a sudden they have credit for your work too. In no situation is that desirable. We should 100% be permitted to protect our intellectual property. And patents allow this to happen, giving the individuals who do the work an opportunity to receive credit for their efforts. Furthermore, patents protect the overall authenticity of the medication being consumed. While patents cannot 100% guarantee the safety of a medication, they certainly undergo much more precautionary measures. The main concern in removing patents from the equation here is the production of counterfeit medication which fraudulently labels what a drug does, where it comes from, and what's in it. This is a major concern from a safety perspective. The existence of a patent allows legitimate production to be tracked and unauthorized production to be stopped. In recent years, a counterfeit medication was introduced to an HIV drug supply chain. The counterfeit medication was consumed by patients who recognized strange side effects and mentioned them to doctors. Once the error was noticed, it was quickly traced and consumers were notified immediately. This also resulted in legal enforcement and stronger supply chain management. So no, the patent does not inherently prevent counterfeit medication from being produced, but it does make it much more difficult and allows for quicker action to be taken in the event that a problem does occur. So, with all that being said, the main takeaway is that patents serve two critical moral purposes. They enable the development of life-saving medicine, and they keep patients safe by deterring the production of harmful counterfeit medications. Thank you.
Does the pro side wish to cross-examine?
Yes. I would like to start off with saying that we are arguing about the morality of patents, not the person that is running the companies. You maintain that companies should retain patents because they are the primary drivers of innovation. Yet, considering that a significant portion of foundational medical research is funded by taxpayers through public institutions, how do you justify allowing private corporations to hold exclusive rights and set high prices on treatments that the public has already helped finance?
So, despite all the funding that comes out of the public already funds the research and development of the medicine. That doesn't mean that it also funds the manufacturing, because the research is not the same as the manufacturing, because most of the time, individuals such as the researchers, as we've been talking about, do not have the means to actually produce the medicines, because they spend all their time doing the research, not setting up a way to actually end up mass producing the medicines afterwards, once the research and development is completed. Thank you.
We have now come to that part of the debate in which we request questions from the House, which may be no longer than 1 minute. First, we will have 2 questions from the House to be presented to the pro team, and then 2 questions from the House to be presented to the con team. Please stand and use the microphone I will bring you when presenting a question. The reply to each question is not to exceed 1 minute. So first, a question for the pro team.
Hello. So you brought up a lot that the use of patents actually diminishes innovation. I would just like to know what specific stats or numbers that you're using to base this off of. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I would like to point out the fact that brand name drugs only make up 9% of prescriptions, but account for 82% of total drug spending, which would allow one to make the correlation that as these name drug brands have the monopoly, it is consistently what people are buying, as it is what is marketed due to the patents. The patents are allowing for a decrease of innovation, which is allowing them to maintain 82% of the sales that you can see clearly in that statistic. Thank you.
Is there a second question from the House for the pro team?
I hope this makes sense, but basically my question is, why is it that the line of morality lies along patents? Like, if we have a duty to provide life-saving medication, why should it not just be free? If that makes sense.
We think that prescription medications should not be free for everyone because we can't exploit the inventors of the medications. They should be completely compensated for their work and their research.
Now we'll have 2 questions from the House for the con team.
So you guys mentioned that medical patents expire after 20 years. I looked up on my cellular telephone. If theoretically tomorrow someone came up with the cure for sickle cell, approximately 375,000 people die of sickle cell annually, which if I did the math right, that's about 7.4 million people over a 20-year period. How would you square that mortality rate with patents being moral? Thank you.
In the case of this debate, we are not arguing that the patents are moral, but rather that they are not immoral. And specifically, in this case, we require the innovation to make this cure in the first place, which, provided by economical studies, patents are what drives this innovation. Furthermore, the patents provide the protection of this medicine in order to make sure that it works, and it actually saves the lives of these people rather than endangering it further. Thank you for the question.
Is there a second question from the House for the con team?
Hello. So, if I recall part of the argument correctly, a lot of it stems around not saying that so you're saying that the patent is not immoral. What happens after with the pharmaceutical companies? That doesn't really matter, like what you say. But so what would your response to an argument surrounding if I have a patent, if I have a monopoly, I am forced to go with the price that a monopoly is set at, and that they're just doing what they must do based on, just economic terms. I mean, you have to operate at a certain price for pure competition, and then you also have to operate at a certain price for pure monopoly. So, anyways, what would your response to that be?
Sorry, is there any way that you can clarify the question that's actually being asked?
My bad. So I'm just wondering. So in a lot of like economic arguments, you're going to hear things like the operating price of monopoly is dictated by just basically what they must be paying, because in pure competition you have to operate at a certain price so that you're not outcompeted. But then there's also like stipulations on if you're operating in a monopoly, you have to operate at a certain price point to meet the like demands of your shareholders, things like that, that kind of thing. I hope that clarifies it a bit more. Sorry, it's a bit loose, but yeah, thank you.
So if I'm interpreting your question correctly, like in the terms of like a monopoly, is like because a drug company like has a monopoly over that specific drug, it gives them they're the sole owner of that drug, like, and because they have it, there isn't competition? Is this, so like, again, like, so the point of them having that is just so that they have exclusive rights to it, so there isn't competition, and that's why they're actually capable of driving it? So I guess for us and like what we're arguing like here, it's that basically, yeah, a big pharmaceutical company is capable of doing that, and they are capable of monopolizing the industry, but that is a fault and morality of that pharmaceutical company and not the physical patent, if that makes sense. Yeah, I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question, but
I now request that the con side present one question to the pro side, and after that, the pro side will present one question to the con side. Again, the reply to each question is not to exceed 1 minute. So first, a question from the con side for the pro side.
In the statistics that you were asked to provide, you mentioned that sales in name brand drugs are higher than the ones in generics. However, we have presented evidence that the sales are higher because the individuals who require the medicine trust the protection and safety of that medicine more due to the research, protection, and innovation that has undergone through these medicines. So, for what other reasons other than this do you fully believe that the patent does increase the sales of the name price drug in comparison to the sales that are gained from simple authenticity?
The question. Thank you. The reason that patents increase the sales of patented drugs is because they distinguish the ability of competing companies to produce those drugs. So then people can't buy from from the generic companies in those cases. And they first, of course, patented drugs are the only option.
Now, a question from the pro side for the con side.
So you might point out that mechanisms such as subsidies, insurance, or international aid already exist to help offset the high cost of these patent drugs. But if the safeguards were truly sufficient, why do we continue to see widespread cases of patients unable to afford the essential medication? Doesn't it suggest that the current system is fundamentally flawed rather than simply in need of minor adjustments?
Thank you for your question. In short, to answer, that is a problem with the system itself, not with the patent. We are arguing whether patents, as patents themselves, so like just the patents, not the system, whether those are moral or immoral. And we're arguing that they are moral. Yes, the system might be flawed, but that's not something that we're here to solve. We're just trying to discuss whether or not the patents are moral or immoral. Thank you.
We will now hear from the final speakers on each side. At this time, I call upon the pro side to present its final speaker, John Kawaki.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for coming tonight and for spending your time to critically examine these complex issues.
I would like to begin by reminding you that this is an argument about morality, not utility or practicality or necessity, but morality. As such, the question before us is this: is the patenting of life-saving medicines moral? Is it good? Is it something that you would proudly stand up for to defend its virtues, or is it simply something that is tolerated because it is useful or practical, a necessary evil, not a moral good? There is a grave difference between the two. I urge you to consider it, as the full weight of the answer to the question before us hinges upon that difference. We, the affirmative team, maintain that the patenting of life-saving medicines is immoral because it allows drug companies to capitalize on people's suffering by exploiting their vulnerable situations for profit, resulting in unnecessary fatalities and disproportionately affects other vulnerable groups. Despite the negative team's desperate attempts to argue otherwise, we have provided compelling evidence that the patenting of life-saving medicines is immoral because it grants monopoly privileges to drug companies who leverage the limited choices of vulnerable people to gain excess profit with no regard for their well-being. This is exploitation, plain and simple. Patents on life-saving medicines as the catalyst and enabler of this broken system are therefore inherently immoral. We have shown that the patenting of life-saving medicines creates a system that meets all the criteria of exploitation by allowing drug companies to charge excessive prices for necessary medicine. We have cited a bevy of studies which show that patents allow medicines to be priced far above what they otherwise would be in a normal market, which our opponents, the concis, have recognized. We've also pointed out the massive price reductions of non-patented medicines, proving these drugs can be sold for far less while still earning a profit. This reveals that the high prices set by drug companies for patented medicines is simply a thinly disguised price gouging scheme used to exploit vulnerable patients, ultimately leading to the unnecessary, premature deaths of tens of thousands of Americans. We've also shown how patenting life-saving medicines disproportionately affects vulnerable groups. When examining demographic data from across the U.S., a significant overlap between groups who are predisposed to needing life-saving medicines and those who are economically disadvantaged is discernible, meaning many people who need the medicines in question are unable to afford them due to the high prices caused by patents. One group of people should not have less of an opportunity to live than another. Yet this is the exact scenario brought on by the patenting of life-saving medicines, ultimately resulting in a high death toll because when these people are unable to afford the medicines they are genetically predisposed to need, they die. Now, our opponents, the negative team, have made the argument that the patenting of life-saving medicines is in fact perfectly moral. They have done this primarily by citing the fact that patents are necessary for innovation and thus are vital to the creation of new medicines, ultimately resulting in better long-term outcomes by saving more lives. However, this argument does not hold up because patents are in reality unnecessary and restrictive to innovation. As we have already articulated at length, patents incentivize companies to exploit legal loopholes, such as evergreening, to extend patent protection instead of risking a new creation, ultimately diverting resources away from innovation efforts. They have also argued that the patent protection is temporary. However, patent protection is often extended up to 40 years, a 100% increase of the normal 20. This is done through various means such as evergreening, legal loophole, very, very gray area type stuff. But again, just to emphasize the point that this is not a temporary state of things in most cases. They have also made the argument that patents are moral because they are necessary to protect the rights of the creators. This is not the case. Creators can still sell their inventions and make a profit without patents. They simply will avoid the harmful effects that patents necessarily cause. I would like to take this opportunity to point out that we are not advocating for free medicine because that's unrealistic and would be exploitative to the inventors. Rather, we are advocating for a free market devoid of the monopoly of patents, which would allow competitive pricing, just like any other product. In closing, the facts of the case are these. The patenting of life-saving medicines is immoral because it allows drug companies to capitalize on the helpless situations of their dying customers to maximize profits
while simultaneously harming other vulnerable groups. When these unfortunate people are unable to pay the exorbitant rates dictated by a monopolistic patent regime, they're left to die by the tens of thousands. This is a grave evil. We must recognize it as such. We as fellow humans ought to be protecting those with chronic illness, not leaving them to the mercy of predatory drug pricing. Because if we do, we are as good as complicit in the evils perpetrated through the pharmaceutical patent system, and as accomplices, the lives of those ruined, the sweat of those exploited, and the blood of those killed is on our hands. So recognize this egregious system for what it is, and vote for our case. Thank you.
I now call upon the con side to present its final speaker, Jeremy Willis.
Good evening, everyone. I would once again like to thank you all for being here. It is your attendance that makes events like this possible. So, on behalf of both teams, even though they already said it, thank you. Now, I'd like to reiterate one final time that we are not arguing that patents are moral. If anything, they're not moral. However, they're inherently not immoral. It'd be genuinely impossible to argue that something that enables the existence of something which lives depend on, like EpiPens, costs upwards of $700. It would be almost impossible to defend that as moral. But at the same time, this is a medication that could have cost billions of dollars to create. Not to mention, eventually it became what is essentially the face of life-saving medications. Are we really saying it's more moral to take away the rewards for being the ones who brought that medication to the market? Like many other things in this world, these patents fall into a sort of gray area, which is something we don't often give enough attention to. We're so used to getting caught up in the black and white, just calling things right and wrong, when we're forgetting about all the little twists and tangles that make it more complicated than that. Now, I would like to address some of the concerns that have been expressed by the others. And one of the big ones was that I would like to specify that research is not the same thing as production. A lot of independent research companies, or even larger research companies, simply do not have the means to facilitate production themselves. The only way that they can effectively recuperate the costs of this production is through patents. And of course, that cost has to be recuperated somehow at some point in time. Otherwise, what would be the point of doing it? Another one was that generics lower prices and create competition. But the issue with generics is that they are not as safe nor as tested as name brand patented products. And for that reason, patents are able to protect the users of these products instead of having to blindly trust these not counterfeit, but these off-brand medications that have not underwent nearly as much testing to ensure their safety. As for the argument of it being a monopoly, it is once again intended to protect those products. To say that it fails to incentivize or even limits innovation, there's always other products to be invented. Just because somebody can't make one that's already been invented, how is that slowing innovation? How is that limiting it? If anything, forcing people to look for other things broadens the amount of medications that we'll have access to. And finally, well not final, but evergreening was another one we mentioned. A key detail that was more or less left out in the definition of evergreening is that the formula must be changed in order for them to renew the patent via evergreening. And that does mean that it is likely going to be improved upon, and in turn must go through even more testing than it originally was. Every instance of evergreening creates a safer product than the version before it. And, of course, our key argument that you've heard so many times before, the patent itself is not what is wrong with the system. It is the holder of the patent. The greed of the people who buy them and exploit them is not the issue of the patent. It is the issue of the people who hold them. Like we already said, a car itself is not the problem. It is the driver who chooses to operate the vehicle insufficiently or unsafely. Also, on the argument of discrimination and it being widespread of individuals who do not have access to this material or this product due to its high pricing, that is, once again, not exclusive to patents. Discrimination and things of that sort is a problem everywhere. That's what we mean by the system being broken rather than the patents themselves. There are places in the world where there's only fast food available to eat just because of where it is. But to return to our main point, it's become so easy to get caught up in the idea of big pharma, and most because the consumer's end of this matters. But it's important to consider the other side of the picture. These products cost billions of dollars and can take decades to complete, which just to take money out of the picture for a minute. This is time that they cannot get back, that they're giving up for the sake of these projects. They deserve and are entitled to be compensated for the fruits of these labors. If anything, to demand a person simply hand away the product of those investments is more moral than them simply benefiting from their work. And to take that away would just extinguish all desire to make those investments in the first place. Why would you develop them if there's nothing you gain? Why would you go to work if you're not getting paid? I wouldn't. It shouldn't be regarded as a charity. It fails to do justice to the creators and their ongoing efforts to create and improve their products, to research, develop, test, advance, and protect their products so that you can have access to safe and effective medications. But in light of everyone already looking bored, I'll leave you with a question that you've already heard. In the argument of medications, which can be the difference between life and death, is the most moral thing, not the one which guarantees that they exist in the first place. Thank you.
At this point, we would like to thank some people who have made this event possible. If you're here, please rise to receive our gratitude when your name is called. First, our debate coaches, Rachel Hampton, Camilla Mosier, Amy Plachta, and Lindy Ventrello. Our debate lab instructors, Professor Amanda Root and Professor Ian Walling. Augustine, Assistant Professor of Library Science. And the members of the Christ College Dean's Office. Now, for our final round of applause, I ask both teams to rise and exit.